From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. We are now less than 3 weeks away from the Alabama Legislature's 2025 regular session that begins on February 4th. Of course, that day we will have live coverage of Governor Kay Ivey's State of the State address here on APT. But this week, most of the political action was in the nation's capital, where President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet nominees went before Senate committees for confirmation hearings. Alabama Senators Tommy Tuberville and Britt played leading roles in those high-profile hearings. Capitol Journal's Alex Engel reports on that questioning from Washington.
Senator Britt got the chance to ask questions of Pam Bondi, who's the AG nominee. She also asked questions of Scott Turner in the Senate Banking Committee nomination hearing. Turner's up to be the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And Senator Tuberville got to ask questions of Pete Hegseth, Trump's pick to be Secretary of Defense this week in the nomination hearing. Tuberville and Britt show that they are very supportive of Trump's nominees. Trump's nominees filled the Senate office buildings this week for confirmation hearings. Trump's pick for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is one of the most controversial. He was first on Tuesday during a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Senator Tommy Tuberville praised Hegseth during the hearing.
You're a tough guy. Been here for a while. Never seen this many people that here for a support of a nominee.
Hegseth has faced allegations of sexual assault, alcohol abuse, and controversial past comments on women in the military. But Tuberville focused on improving military recruiting and calling out DEI policies. The senator also rallied for Hegseth with veterans earlier this week. Hegseth says fixing that starts with leadership at the top.
That chain has started to break, with generations of people my age and older talking to their kids and grandkids, wondering, pondering, do I want them to serve? Will my country use them responsibly?
While Democrats at the hearing questioned Hegseth's qualifications and quizzed him on his knowledge of international affairs, they also went after his controversial statements on women in combat roles. The next day, Senator Britt applauded Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi. Britt showed she was all in for Bondi.
The United States of America could only be so fortunate if you were confirmed and to have someone of your caliber, of your intellect, and of your experience running a department that unfortunately has been run into the ground.
While Democrats questioned if Bondi could be independent of Trump, the committees will now vote on the nominees. On Capitol Hill, Alex Engel, Capitol Journal.
And we have another update on committee assignments in this new Congress. Alabama's newest Congressman, Shamari Figures, has been assigned to the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the House Agriculture Committee. If you recall, those were his top choices when we last talked here in studio back in December. The rest of the delegation will retain their existing committee assignments. Congressman Barry Moore will serve on the Agriculture and Judiciary Committees. Congressman Mike Rogers remains chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Robert Adderholt remains on the Appropriations Committee, where he chairs the key subcommittee on Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education. And Congressman Gary Palmer remains on the Energy and Commerce Committee and the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. Back here in Alabama, the Blockchain Study Committee met this week here in the State House to discuss the future of this emerging technology and its potential impact on the state. Blockchain is a digital ledger that securely records transactions in a way that's transparent and nearly impossible to alter, making it the backbone for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. The Commission is exploring the benefits and challenges of blockchain, but they're also in a holding pattern, awaiting action from lawmakers in Washington. State Senator Greg Albritton expressed concerns about understanding and preparing for the changes that blockchain might bring, while Amanda Senn of the Alabama Securities Commission highlighted the protections in place for traditional currency compared to the uncertainty of cryptocurrency.
My concern at this point is what's the detrimentals to it, all right? How is this going to affect us? And when it starts affecting how we make payments and how we receive payments, and particularly from the Fed, we've got to be able to understand that and know it. We will probably still be talking dollars and cents. It's simply the methodology that that's going to be transacted in, and we've got to be prepared for that. I think that's my biggest concern.
But there is still the government that has agreed, hey, this is our legal tender. You can put it in a bank, insure it, up to a certain amount in multiple bank accounts. And so there are, there's a framework in place, and there are measures and protections behind the U.S. dollar that don't exist right now with cryptocurrency. Blockchain technology is transparent, certainly is, but in terms of like understanding the data that you are looking at on a screen, it's still incomprehensible for some.
The Alabama Reentry Commission met again this week to put the finishing touches on a report to the legislature on ways the state can help further reduce recidivism. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott reports.
Alabama's Reentry Commission is looking for more ways to streamline the state's reentry process. Data collected from the Department of Justice shows what's working and what could possibly work in Alabama.
It also shows the huge demand and increase in the need for more mental health services, which I know Commissioner Boswell lobbies for quite often. It also shows for the need for greater pay and investment in our correctional officers, which I know Commissioner Ham, you advocate for.
A lot of the attendees are bringing forth ideas to help the state improve its recidivism rates. And another point of discussion, helping set new guidelines to help those facing reentry into society.
To hear from you all in terms of, do the findings resonate? Do they align with what you're seeing from your perspectives and where you sit on reentry and within the criminal justice system? What are your priorities from your agencies and your constituents?
There has to be more ways, especially in terms of reentry into society, of diverting individuals that we know have a diagnosable or treatable mental illness and keeping them out of a facility somewhere where they're going to be intentionally misdiagnosed. Not intentionally, but put it this way, the crisis demands a response that doesn't require treatment. It requires stabilization.
Admittedly, there's some pretty serious scenarios there where you kind of understand the concerns of the community, but at some point we have to come together on, is this person really ready, and what is a reasonable way to transition them back to the community with some safeguards and with some continued sort of proving that they can function well in the community.
We do provide reentry services to inmates. We have about 2,000 at EOS every year, so we do have reentry services. Can we do better? Absolutely, but we do have them.
In Montgomery, Randy Scott, Capitol Journal.
A big announcement this week from the Alabama Community College System and the Alabama Board of Nursing. They are partnering up to address the state's healthcare worker shortage by expanding ACCS health science programs. This includes a new certification aimed at filling thousands of critical roles in the healthcare field. Capitol Journal's Jeff Sanders has that story.
The demand for healthcare workers in Alabama is reaching a critical level. In response, the Alabama Community College System is ramping up efforts to expand healthcare training programs at community colleges statewide.
We are in a position where hospitals literally are beginning to close in a lot of the rural areas.
Jimmy Baker, chancellor of the Alabama Community College System, joined representatives from Alabama's healthcare industry and the Office of Workforce Development to highlight the expansion of health science programs available through the state's community colleges.
It's a great career, a good paying career for many of our young students. They can go and in a short period of time receive enough training to be effective as a worker in the healthcare industry.
To address a statewide decline in nursing support staff, the Alabama Board of Nursing has introduced the NSTC credential. This initiative is described as a critical step towards solving workforce challenges caused by ongoing shortages in the healthcare industry.
We hope to fill anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 vacancies currently in healthcare related to this program. And one of the first things we did was reach out to ACCS and say, do you want to be a part of this and can you help us?
The system is also launching dual enrollment opportunities for high school students, enabling them to earn nursing credentials early and paving a direct path to careers in healthcare. Greg Reed serves as the governor's senior advisor on workforce transformation.
The governor stands ready. I think the legislature stands ready to do what's necessary to support this effort in regards to training healthcare professionals so our economy can continue to grow and we can all receive the care and our families can receive the care that are so important to each of us.
And the Alabama Community College system already offers more than 80 health science programs at 22 colleges across the state. Reporting for Capital Journal, I'm Jeff Sanders.
This past weekend, the Alabama Big Ten mayors, those representing the 10 largest cities from across the state, gathered in Tuscaloosa to collaborate on strategies for addressing challenges in their communities ahead of the legislative session. Among the key presentations was one from the Tuscaloosa Police Department, which showcased innovative technologies being used to enhance public safety, from drones serving as first responders to new resource allocation strategies. Tuscaloosa is leveraging these tools to set what Mayor Walt Maddox calls the elite standard.
For a majority of cities in Alabama, the largest expense we're going to have is public safety. The city of Tuscaloosa, 41% of our general fund budget is dedicated towards public safety. It's what we do. It's at the core of keeping our community, our neighborhoods safe. So using technology is a great leverage point to help use it as a multiplier effect and to keep 71 square miles of our city safe. It's something we wanted to share. We believe Tuscaloosa's drone response program is the elite standard.
We can send out real-time alerts to myself and other staff members that need to see what's going on immediately. We have interior drones, we have exterior drones. It's kind of has not replaced anything, but it has built that vault that we can use with our tools to get safer information rather than always sending an officer in first. We can now send a drone in first.
There have been interesting developments on the education front in Alabama lately. That's why we dedicated a whole show to it this week. Spotlight on Education aired Thursday, and in case you missed it, the episode is on our YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com/@CapitalJournal to catch up on those stories, including my in-depth conversation with APT education reporter Trish Crane. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode of Capital Journal. We'll be right back with this week's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is State Senator Arthur Orr, Chairman of the Senate Education Budget Committee. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd. Good to be with you.
Well, we're just about 2 weeks before session. It's kind of hard to believe it's coming up this quickly. So I wanted to get an update on where we are on those budgets. You know, the education budget that's going to be in your committee. I know you'll spend a lot of time in the off season with, aides and budget folks. Where are we in terms of revenues and leading up to writing that budget?
Well, revenues are trending back to the norm, which is not certainly a bad thing. We're not negative, but certainly the growth in revenues has gone back to the norm, and that means the budget for next year will have a supplemental of around $500 million that will be available. Then we'll be on the K-12 side looking at significant PHIP and TRS expenditures that we're going to have to budget for. And then continuing numeracy and literacy and pre-K and endeavors like that, keep funding those so they're fully implemented across the state. So those are ongoing maintenance items that have to see year-over-year funding increases more or less.
I know y'all typically have budget hearings at the beginning of the session where you hear from agency leaders about their needs and things like that. Is that a good time for members of your committee to kind of understand, person to person, what the state needs, those agencies specifically?
Sure, and we'll have those hearings the first week of the session, the education side and the general fund side. So members will come and go and listen to various agencies that they may have a particular interest in. But yes, it's helpful in plotting the course. And of course, we'll have the governor's budget to be able to see what her recommendations are and take it from there.
Yeah. I know y'all have talked about this idea of modernizing the way we allocate funds from the state to individual school districts, right? The funding formula. I guess it goes back to the 90s, maybe even further than that. You can go back to the 30s in terms of how we started the foundation program, and maybe it was updated in the 90s. But talk about that. Y'all have had several meetings, gone through this idea, making it more modern, meeting needs of students, because some students need, it costs more to educate different students based on their needs. Where are we on that, and might we see anything in the upcoming session?
Well, we've had to go through, an education process with the various members and show them what other states are doing, how the funding formulas work in other states when it's student need based on the student needs. As you articulated, the student needs roughly being defined as special ed. It costs more for a special ed child or an English language learner, or sometimes, and the research shows that children coming in out of poverty, for them the costs somewhat are higher, need more attention. So in that sense, we would like to pivot from just a sheer head count type situation, which we have now in the foundation program. How many students do you have? And based on that enrollment, this is how much money you get. And all students are treated equally, more or less. And pivot to something that is based on those student needs. You have a base, so you have the ADM or the daily membership or the census amount, and then you, on top of that, you would parcel out funds to provide extra money for an English language learner child who's going to require English classes to learn to be able to study and be a student and succeed. So all those are coming to a head. The educational process is over. We've thrown up some models, not for this is the way it's going to be, but more just showing how it works and what the different levers are with the models and what you can tweak and move around and how they work. So now it's time to say, do we punt and do nothing? Tennessee and Mississippi moved recently to this student-based funding formula. 46 states already have it, so we're one of 4 left. And or do we do something in the middle, a hybrid? That's kind of the Georgia model. Or do we go all in like Tennessee and Mississippi? So it'll be up to the committees to think about that and see. And we're meeting next week, and so we'll see what the disposition of the committees are.
Not an easy thing to do, obviously.
No.
Anytime I mean, talk about turning around an aircraft carrier kind of thing. But as you said, we're going to be one of the last states to actually accomplish this, or so it sounds like it's gotta, something like this has to happen at some point. Maybe it's baby steps, but
could be.
Yep. I do think it's important that y'all have put it out there and gone ahead and kind of tackled it as an issue rather than just ignoring it. And so we'll see what happens. I hope you'll keep us updated as that goes. Because I tell folks all the time, when it comes to education, you're talking about the largest amount that we spend, period, in this building, in the State House. So it's really important how that goes. I want to ask you, switching gears just a little bit, about the CHOOSE Act. Obviously passed in the last legislative session. It was overwhelmingly passed. It was the governor's priority, your priority, Chairman Garrett's priority. And just this year, just a couple weeks ago actually, we saw it go into effect in terms of families could start applying. And you saw a pretty overwhelming response just in the couple of weeks that it's been in effect. What was your reaction to that? Were you surprised by that? Is that sort of proof positive of what y'all wanted?
Yeah, we knew there would be a pent-up demand from those that were very clued in to the legislation and wanted something to happen to follow the lead of a lot of these other states who have gone down this path. I think the real question becomes kind of what's round two look like? In other words, do we get this pent-up demand group and that all sending in applications today and want to be participants? What happens next year and the next year? Does it kind of start a brush fire and more, or a snowball, and we start getting larger and larger, or is it just kind of taper off and you see small incremental increases year over year? So that's the question, and for me, as the one that will need to fund it, we did put a cap on it that is important, and we can raise the cap if the demand is there. But we're kind of learning as we go and making sure that the needs are met, but we want to make sure the program ensures the quality of education of these children participating.
Right. Well, yeah, caps are important because, this money comes from somewhere. In this case, it's tax receipts, and that would normally go into the Education Trust Fund. So I understand that.
But these children come from parents that
pay those taxes.
They're paying those taxes.
Right,
so,
absolutely. But that's always the sort of tension, because you're in charge of that Education Trust Fund. It's that's what y'all do. Speaking of that, studies, watching the data, watching how laws actually work. You wrote an interesting op-ed this week about the DOGE thing at the national level. President Trump, incoming President Trump, wants the Department of Government Efficiency, right? Wanting to tackle, he's talking about $2 trillion. I don't know if it'll ever get that much, but talking about government efficiency. You wrote this interesting op-ed about how here in Alabama, you've had something sort of like this. You chair that commission that kind of focuses on government efficiency. Talk about where that came from and what your op-ed sort of spelled out.
Yeah, well, this goes back to my days as chairman of the General Fund, and it was exceedingly difficult and those go back to the days of the Great Recession, and you would have all the agency heads come forward and say, you can't cut this program, or this program's doing great work, or whatever, and they had nothing on which to base their claims. In other words, the data many times were insufficient, and you just were flying blindly without any radar, without any knowledge of all of the various programs and expenditures of the agency.
Just anecdotes from
just from don't cut us, cut them.
Okay.
More or less.
Trust me,
we were in a cutting mode, and so not having any reliable information upon which to make funding decisions in the legislature, poked around and found national groups were already doing this, had stood up in state government an organization to evaluate these programs and whether they're really working and they're hitting as many people as they claim, and is it effective, and are things changing? In other words, for example, if you have a program for prison education, is it reducing recidivism? Is it causing inmates to go get a job after they come out of prison, or is it just a feel good and we think we're doing something right and well and helping the inmates get a life after prison, and that doesn't really seem to be the case. So who's evaluating? Who's looking? Who's testing and verifying? So we set up before COVID a group called the Alabama Commission on Evaluation of Services, and I know that sounds nerdy, but it's called ACES for short. And we did something different here in Alabama because at the time, and of course now, and perhaps for the foreseeable future, you see a Republican governor probably going to be in place and a Republican legislature probably going to be in place. So we worked with Governor Ivey, and we have the executive branch and the legislative branch at the table managing. My counterpart, Chief of Staff Liz Fillmore is involved, and others, of course, members from the administration. But to shepherd this organization and look at various agencies and see how we can improve government. Now, we're, as a stand-up or startup, we are crawling before we walk, before we run, and I think we're about to hit the walking phase. But it's not a greatly expensive organization. We didn't want to add more bureaucracy, but it has been helpful to have a group that's from the outside, because in these agencies, if you ask them to self-examine themselves. Oh, all is rosy.
Right.
Usually,
Sure.
that's a difficult place to put them in. But we, rather than paying an outside accounting group or some outside to come in and evaluate, we do have this independent organization within the government, and we work together to see how various programs and expenditures can be better for the people of Alabama, save taxpayer money in the process. So I'm encouraged about where we are. It takes a lot to train the staff and all that you have to go through to assemble the data, but we're making progress, and I'm pleased with it. And I thought the people of Alabama ought to know about this. It's a little inside baseball, but it's important.
Well, that's what our viewers really like. Yeah, you're right. No agency is going to come to you and say, Mr. Chairman, we really need a haircut. We're just not.
It's happened once or twice, where they say we don't need an increase,
yeah.
So
a little doge of our own.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Well, that's good, and I'd like to follow up on that too, because accountability when it comes to taxpayer dollars is really important. I think not only for lawmakers but those you represent who pay the taxes, and that's so interesting. And we'll share that op-ed. We've gone too long, but I can't let you go without bringing this up. You've recently ruled out rumors that you might run for Attorney General. These rumors have percolated over the years, but
That's
you just
correct.
kind of laid it to rest before session started. Can you talk about that?
Well, as you say, I've been contacted through the years, through the months, and the contacts were increasing ever so much, and with pledges of support and help. We want to help you. You're the guy, whatever. And quite frankly, I heard something, Todd, a couple years ago that's resonated with me. And somebody said, what do you daydream about? And what do you think about? And when I considered that, Attorney General was not one of them. I'm very focused on what I'm doing here in the legislature, and I find the process rewarding. People say, do you enjoy it? I didn't come down to Montgomery to enjoy things, but it is rewarding to see good policy decisions made and fund good meritorious projects and things across the state. And so wanted to put that out there as candidates are considering getting into the race, and whether they were in or out, they would have one less candidate that had been rumored to be in the race to consider, and certainly that would be myself.
Okay. Well, that's, probably cuts out a lot of alternative talk through the session that, you're going to be pretty busy anyway, so that's pretty wise. Well, Senator, again, thanks for coming on. We look forward to more conversations just 2 weeks before session. Thanks again.
Thank you, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is State Representative Chris England from Tuscaloosa. Mr. England, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we've got session coming up. Be here before we know it. I always enjoy having you on. You follow a good bit of legislation there on the Judiciary Committee, a lot of it. And so I wanted to ask you about some of that. I wanted to start with this simplified seller's use tax. It's been a couple years now you've introduced legislation. Of course, this is colloquially known as like the online sales tax,
right.
Reforms from going back, back to 2015. What would your legislation do? How would it alter the SSUT, and what's the reason behind it?
Well, first again, thanks for having me. The SSUT itself was initially designed to encourage online marketplace facilitators to collect tax when they facilitate a transaction.
Amazon, for
example, because initially they didn't have to, and there was some belief there that we couldn't tax them. So what we did was give them a lower tax rate, 8%, and then also simplify their tax collection, because all they have to do now, instead of determining whether the sale occurred and then distributing those sales taxes to localities. It's just collect 8%, send it to the state, and we did the rest. So it was pretty successful initially because there were people who voluntarily entered into the program and started paying the SSUT. But during the interim, from when we enacted that law until now, the Supreme Court in a Wayfair decision said that we can, in fact, assess a tax on those transactions as long as this taxing scheme is simple, right? So, in my opinion, we've reached a point where it's outlived its usefulness because we can, in fact, impose a tax on those folks and collect it, as long as it remains simple. So as a result of the SSUT, there's a lot of inequities that have been created. Cities, school systems, and so forth, who would normally get a lion's share of the taxes that are collected on brick and mortar transactions are now losing that money as a result of people who are shopping online. So we put our brick and mortars at a disadvantage against a large multinational conglomerate that really doesn't have much interest in Alabama's economic future. So what my bill seeks to do is try to address some of those inequities because a lion's share of the sales that occur that fuel the SSUT occur in cities, the major cities. But a large percentage of the money that's distributed goes to places that had absolutely nothing to do with the sale. Why that's hurtful is because it damages cities' budgets. They're losing money. But it also, on a local level, the money that was usually spent in a brick and mortar that would normally go to your local school board is now not going. So all of the costs that are associated with running a school system are local costs, like transportation, for example. The gulf between what they have and what they need is continuing to grow, and there's nothing there to address it. So trying to address those inequities by either increasing the amount that we collect and making it equal or average equal from 8% to like 9.25 or 9.5, or changing your distribution formula to a certain degree to make sure that we address some of those inequities, especially with education.
And I hear what you're saying, and I especially hear on the school side, like you said, the difference between brick and mortar. They get a lot of that sales tax at the local level.
Yeah.
I also know that the state's general fund and local counties and cities' general fund have benefited from the SSUT in its current. So I'm guessing they probably wouldn't be too happy with legislation like that.
No, they're not. And it's the art of politics. It's the negotiation part of this because you've got to think of it two ways. You may get money on the front end, right? But if responsibilities in other areas that you're indirectly responsible for, like schools, continue to grow, you're going to have to appropriate some of your funding to help with those problems. That's the first part. But
so it all comes out in the wash.
It should. But the second part is, if people continue to see the benefit of providing simplified seller use tax of transactions, meaning it's a lower cost and it's easier for me to administer, you're going to have more people who are seeking to become SSUT, businesses, for example. What that means is, if it's a benefit to you as a business to not have a brick and mortar where you can put, it's a lower tax rate and it's easier on me as far as my tax administration is concerned, well, you're going to start seeing less brick and mortar and more online sellers, which would be devastating to local economies and cities and counties because you're going to have businesses choosing whether or not I locate there or have me a distribution center where you just order and I deliver it. So it's easier on me. You're putting your people in these situations, your brick and mortars, at a significant disadvantage against their out-of-state competitors.
Well, we'll look forward to that debate, which will probably be a lively one when the legislature convenes.
Yep.
Switching topics, bail reform. You've also introduced this in different iterations a couple of years in a row. Talk to me about what bail reform entails as you see it and why it's important.
Well, oftentimes when the legislature responds to an issue, we overreact, overshoot. And there was legislation that was passed a couple of years ago that essentially changed the way that we do business. Generally speaking, a court system could issue what's called a percentage bond. And on that percentage bond, if you had 1,000, they could charge you 10% and make you pay cash. You pay cash directly to the court system, And guess what? Magically, court costs get paid, victims get compensation, and so forth and so on. Well, how we changed the law a couple of years ago requires just about everyone in the court system to get a bondsman instead of allowing the courts to do a percentage bond and take cash. Well, what that does, other than provide business for bonding companies, it also takes resources away from the court system. And also, if you say you miss a court date or you have to bond out of jail, well, usually if you don't appear, some of that money's taken to pay your fines and your court costs and also restitution if necessary. But instead, that same dollar, that same money that you gave to the bondsman doesn't go to the court. You'll pay them and you'll still owe the court. So when we say bail reform, this is really just a way to restore what we were doing for years to make sure that people, their money works for their benefit in terms of paying fines and court costs, but it also works for the court system benefit because that money goes to the court instead of a bondsman. But ultimately, it also goes to the victim's benefit because it goes to the victim instead of going to a bondsman. So the bill that I sponsored attempts to restore what we've been doing for decades, which is put the court system, victims, and so forth first.
Interesting. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk of how victims are compensated, and talk about moving them to the front of the line rather than down the line.
Right.
Real quick, I wanted to ask you about pardons and paroles. You've got a bill having to do with pardons and paroles. This is something you've been involved in for a long time. Beyond just the bill, what do you see as the next steps in terms of pardons and paroles? The board, I know that Director Ward's done, doing things a lot differently, and the future there.
Well, you've seen over the course of the last 6 years, from 2019 until 2025, just a massive change in the way things were done, to the point where we went from over 50% of paroles being granted and pardons being granted to under 8 to 6 to 7, 8%. And there's one unifying event to all of that, and that was the appointment of Lee Wapney as chair. So when we changed the law, we made the board responsible for several things. We instituted new guidelines that the board has routinely ignored for the last 6 years, but part of that, the law also required the board to reassess, to collect data, so we could figure out within 2 years of the new law being enacted from 2019 to 2022, whether or not it was working. Well, and then if it wasn't, we were supposed to go through an entire process to fix it. Up until this point, 5 years after that law is passed, it hasn't been done, first and foremost. So we've wasted millions of dollars. But we had a hearing recently where the chair goes before us and said that not only is she ignoring the guidelines primarily, she's also changing them because she says they don't work. Well, part of that process was to get public involvement, so if we had to change it, the public was involved. It's not something that the chair can unilaterally do, at least according to the law, but she's doing it anyway. So not only have we wasted millions of dollars trying to create a guideline system, but the data's corrupted so we can't use it, but also the sunlight part of this, where we were supposed to have public involvement, has been violated because she's just been changing it unilaterally. So if, as a chair, if you had an issue with the way the guidelines were working, we gave you a way to fix it, not do it on your own, but use the process to create guidelines that work so we can all have a better process.
So would this Criminal Justice Policy Development Council address that in any way?
Yes, it would. It would help us go do what the law required and give us some oversight to make sure that who's ever in charge follows the law. But there is a bright light at the end of this tunnel. In 2025, her term ends. And the best way to get any sort of parole reform done and to get us back on the right track is to not confirm her and appoint another chair. And I think, all the legislation that we sponsored and all the ideas that we've created, one of the biggest barriers to getting where we need to go is the chair. And listen, I've said this a million times. If the parole process doesn't work, we don't have enough money to build a prison large enough, we don't have enough money to care for the population that's created if the parole system isn't working. So it needs oversight. It possibly needs to expand its membership so one person can't just commandeer the entire process, but also there needs to be some firm deadlines imposed So what we required to be done in 2019 is actually done now. So we can even make a good judgment as to whether or not the guidelines are even working. Because if we had done it the right way, we could have got to this point organically several years ago and changed the guidelines. But since the chair hasn't done it, we're now wasted millions of dollars and there's no oversight, so we don't even know if the guidelines are working or not.
Wow, some strong words early in the year, but look, this is something we should be watching. I really appreciate you bringing it to our attention. We'll be watching it going forward. We got to leave it there. Mr. England, thanks again for coming on the show. We'll see you in a couple weeks when the legislative session gets started.
Looking forward to it.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Since 1997, Alabama Public Television has provided programs, services, and resources to child care professionals, teachers, and parents. Visit aptv.org/education to learn more.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is State Representative Steve Clouse from Ozark. Mr. Clouse, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.
Well, you made some news this week because you have announced that you will seek re-election after there had been some talk of you maybe calling it a career after 30 years in the legislature. So let me just ask you, what made you want to give it another go?
Well, I'd said a couple of years ago I aspired to be speaker and ran for that post and told folks if I were to win, I was just going to serve one more term. And of course, I came up short in that endeavor. And since that time, I've just had just overwhelming response from constituents in Dale and Houston County and from fellow House members, including the President Speaker, to ask me to reconsider, to stay on. And so I've decided to. I like the process. It gets a little frustrating sometimes, but I like working with the people and like trying to help folks back home.
Well, it is important in the legislature to have, kind of elder statesmen, experienced institutional knowledge, because every 4 years there's a new crop of young new lawmakers, which there will be again in 2026. So if you were to be reelected, you'd have a lot of those young lawmakers. Let me ask you, over the years, are there some things that a couple of things you've learned that would be especially important to pass along to younger lawmakers from your experience?
Well, I think so. Obviously, you start off with the rules. I mean, that's the big thing that a new lawmaker has to learn is the process, how a bill is passed, and how to communicate that back to their districts, and also staying in touch with the people in their district. It's very, very important for them as they're studying different legislation. But since I've had so much experience on the budget issues, particularly the general fund, that's where a lot of folks back home are really concerned about funding issues for the different agencies. And it's so important to learn the mechanics of the budgets, the fact that we've got two separate budgets. A lot of new lawmakers don't know that we have an education budget and a general fund budget. We're one of only 3 states in the nation that operate like that. So you have to separate those two. And then you have to learn that there's so much we do, particularly on the general fund side, that involves matching funds on the federal level. So it's not like just coming in and cutting across the board. There's certain things, particularly on Medicaid, mental health, the Department of Human Resources, there's a certain threshold we have to meet to be able to draw down those federal dollars. So we have to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, knowing those nuances, it's not just, it can be complicated. Interesting you talk about staying in touch with the constituents back home, being that, because y'all are, as members, you really are like a conduit between your constituents and state agencies a lot of times, right? If somebody's having trouble dealing with a state agency, they call their lawmaker.
That's right. And so, and that is a long, drawn-out process, playing phone tag in this day and age with the agency, getting a partial answer that you're trying to get back to your constituent, and then back to the state agency, and making sure if there can be a solution that it finally comes to fruition.
Right.
It's not a 15-second phone call.
Right. Well, I was thinking about this interview, and I was just thinking about your career. You know, every area of the state needs like a legislative leader, a dean of the delegation, so to speak. It's not like an official role, but it you know, Birmingham, North Alabama, Huntsville, here in the River Region, Mobile. You are that for the Wiregrass, right? You are sort of the legislative dean of that. So I'm curious, again, it's not official, but what goes into that in terms of your leadership role for that area for all the lawmakers?
Well, that's one of the things that when we get into the legislature, a lot of the problems that we have to deal with are usually local issues that don't involve the other part of the state. And because that's where people are really concerned about things back home, a particular local issue, whatever that may be. And so a lot of our delegations, they can't get along, and that causes spills into the regular session. It blocks statewide business. And we've had those issues in the Wiregrass in the past, but we haven't in the last 7, 8, 9 years. We have really worked very good together. And it's a matter of trying to fill that process out, because you're dealing with folks who live in a county over or a town over, and sometimes there's conflicts there. And so it's good to know that process and know that just like you're dealing with legislation here, it's got to be massaged and to work those issues out. And so we've been successful at that.
Yeah, sometimes those Friday night football things bleed over into
That's
legislative fights, but it's amazing how what a difference it makes when local delegations do work together. I've seen that here locally where I'm from. Well, looking forward, this session, the next session, maybe in the next couple of years, what are some things that you foresee happening legislatively? Last session was a giant session, a lot got accomplished. What are you looking forward to this session and beyond?
Well, there's very few sessions where there's not an unexpected thing that pops up.
Right.
2 years ago, we had congressional redistricting. Just all of a sudden, the Supreme Court, the feds, saying we had to redraw the districts. So we had to stop what we were doing to come up with a new redistricting plan. Of course, sent it off, and it was not approved, and then they ended up doing what they wanted to do anyway. And so that issue, affected my area, the Wiregrass, more so than anybody.
Right.
So it was something we were very much attuned to, and that it's not over with yet. It's a court case going on now. We may very well have to readdress it here, and I want to make sure that the Wiregrass is looked after the best way possible. That may very well be happening with the state Senate seats. There's a lawsuit dealing with that. We may have to stop, in the middle of session or have a special session to deal with some state Senate seats.
That's right.
So that will be important not only to everybody in the state, but of course it could bleed down into the Wiregrass too. So last year during the session, all of a sudden, IVF.
Oh, yeah.
In vitro fertilization. I mean, I could have put on my little finger what I knew about IVF, but I know a lot about it now.
Yeah.
And we had to stop in the middle of the session, and we came up with a Band-Aid dealing with the issue that the Alabama Supreme Court had ruled on to be able to get the IVF clinics to reopen and grant them immunity. But it was just a Band-Aid. We're not through with that issue. So I don't know that we'll deal with it this year, but that's something that I want to be able to have a seat at the table on, because we, not only in my area, but all over the state, there was a lot of prospective parents, a lot of prospective grandparents who probably don't get involved in politics, but they got involved in that issue.
Right.
And they'll be looking for some answers here.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because you can make all the legislative plans in the world, but those surprises come up seemingly every year. So we may not know right now what the big surprise is going to be.
That's right.
So, well, look, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate how available you've made yourself over the years. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks when the session begins.
All right. Thank you, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. This coming Thursday, Alabama Public Television will air an exciting new documentary, Big Mama Thornton, Alabama Kid. It chronicles the extraordinary life of Alabama native Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton, who was one of the greatest blues singers of all time. Here's a clip.
All right, shut up all that noise. I'm here now. I lost a tooth. I don't know why I can sing pretty good tonight. I lost one right in front. Look at that. Isn't that pretty?
Willie Mae's humor is an important part of her legacy.
Every set, she'd reach and pull a harmonica out of her bra. People went crazy. In the middle of one of the hot songs, she'd bump the drummer off of his seat, and she'd sit down and play drums. She put on a show.
And joining me next to talk about the film is the filmmaker himself, Mr. Robert Clem. Mr. Clem, welcome back to Capital Journal.
Thanks, Todd. Good to be here.
Well, I'm really excited about this project. I know it premieres this weekend. You get the big premiere in Birmingham, but it's going to air next week on APT. Talk about the inspiration for this film. What inspired you to make a film about Big Mama Thornton?
I've been working with blues musicians in Alabama for several years. I did this film, Alabama Black Belt Blues. Mm-hmm. And it was suggested to me by Peggy Hare, actually, at APT, that Big Mama Thornton was a good subject. She's quite famous in some circles, but a lot of people don't know her because she died 40 years ago. But at the time, she had a great career, and when I looked more at her story, her Alabama roots were very important to her. Her father was a preacher. A lot of her music is instilled with her religious training, the sense of syncopation, the phrasing. A lot of these things in her music are the product of her upbringing in Alabama. But she left Alabama at age 14 with kind of joining the circus. It was a traveling variety show. Okay. I mean, her life is really fascinating. Little Richard was, she knew Little Richard from that experience. So she went along there, I think maybe for 10 years. She was going around on buses, staying wherever, and singing, and they had dancers, and they had comedians, chorus girls. It was like vaudeville, really almost. Black vaudeville, all black theaters. Then she landed in Houston because they weren't paying her very well, and there she made her first record and got linked up with Don Roby. Now this is another interesting part of the story. Don Roby was a black music promoter in Houston, a gambler. He kind of was a gangster, really, in some respects. And he made records, and I gave her a contract. She went out to L.A., and there with a Greek-American blues lover, Johnny Otis, she recorded Hound Dog, written for her by Lieber and Stoller. And we have Stoller in the film talking about this thing. And he said, boy, she was tough. She looked tough, and she was tough because they said, Mama, the song doesn't go like that. She said, don't tell me how to sing the blues.
Well, it sounds tough. The record sounds tough. Well,
that's what I'm saying. They wrote the song for her. So I think later on when Elvis made it famous and made a lot more money than she ever did, I think she was a little bitter about that because the song had been written for her. And it was really the way she had done it at the time with her own ad-libbing kind of created that as an R&B hit. It was a national hit on the R&B charts.
We love telling Alabama stories, and I know it must be fun as a filmmaker to research this, learn about it, and then translate that into film. Can you kind of share your filmmaking process? How do you go about research and putting it all together from start to finish?
Well, the first thing I had to do with this film was I knew there were two people in San Francisco that I needed to interview right away, both nonagenarians, 90-something years old. One of them was Chris Trockowitz, who had been a big force in her early career in California. And he made some of her best records. So I got an appointment to interview him after he looked at some of my other work, And then he suggested Big Mama's manager, Jim Moore, who's African-American. He's in his 90s. And so I also got interviews with two other people out there who were not quite as old as that, but I knew I had to get them right away. So I went out there and got them. So once I had them in the can, so to speak, then I went out and to find anybody else who knew her. She's been dead for 40 years. Knew her, sang with her, played with her, saw her perform. And so I just rounded them all up, found them, recorded them.
Let them tell their stories.
Let them tell their stories, get them to talk. And so, yeah, and then finding the music, the performance footage. And unfortunately, people always say, well, I wish there were more performance footage. And that's right, there just doesn't exist. As I said, she was very famous and well-known and beloved, but there wasn't that much footage of her because, first of all, a lot of the concerts just weren't filmed back then like they are now. But there is a good bit of stuff in there, and you get to see her really do some good stuff. So I'm very happy with that part.
Well, I'm excited about it. We love great Alabama stories. Thank you for sharing this documentary. We're looking forward to the premiere this weekend, and it airs Thursday at 8 o'clock on APT. Mr. Clem, thanks again.
Thanks, Todd.
We'll be right back.
Tuscaloosa served as the second capital of Alabama from 1826 to 1846 when the capital moved to Montgomery. The Greek Revival and Federal-styled Capitol building was leased to Alabama Central Female College for use as a concert hall and classrooms until it was destroyed by fire in 1923. The architectural influence of the structure is reflected in many of the buildings on the University of Alabama campus, and the ruins are a city park.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.